The conference room floated in the void between stars, a neutral meeting place where no species held advantage. Ambassador Na Young sat at the curved table, her hands folded peacefully as two alien delegations screamed at each other in their native tongues. The translation devices struggled to keep up with the insults flying back and forth. "Enough," Na Young said quietly. Both aliens stopped immediately. In her 83 years as humanity's chief diplomat, she had developed a reputation. When Na Young spoke, even the most aggressive species listened. "You are arguing over mining rights to an asteroid field that contains enough minerals for both your species for the next 1,000 years. Split it down the middle. Move on." The two alien representatives looked at each other, then at Na Young. Slowly, they nodded. Within minutes, a treaty was signed. Another conflict resolved without a single shot fired. The other coalition members in the room nodded approvingly. This was what humanity did best. They made peace. Captain Dai Huang watched the negotiation from his ship, the Gentle Dawn, which orbited the neutral station. His crew of 40 humans maintained the diplomatic vessel, which carried no weapons beyond simple defensive shields. Like all human ships in coalition space, it was designed for peace, not war. Dai turned away from the screen and returned to his daily reports. Another boring day in a boring job, exactly as it should be. 3 sectors away, the Vrelok war fleet assembled. Supreme Commander Thaxir stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Blood Triumph, and looked at the holographic display showing human-controlled space. 47 systems had fallen to the Vrelok in the past 30 years. Species after species had tried to resist. All had failed. The Vrelok were warriors, bred for combat, enhanced for killing. They knew nothing but conquest. "Humans," Thaxir said, tasting the word with disgust. "They talk. They negotiate. They surrender before fighting even begins." His second-in-command nodded in agreement. Intelligence reports showed that humanity had been part of the coalition for 83 years without participating in a single military action. They had no battle fleet, no warrior culture, no history of violence. They were weak. The decision was simple. The Vrelok Empire would take Earth and all human colonies. The species would be enslaved or eliminated. It would take minimal effort. Perhaps a single ship would be enough, but Thaxir decided to send 20. He wanted to make an example of humanity, to show the coalition what happened to the weak. Back on the neutral station, Na Young received an urgent message. Her face showed no emotion as she read it, but those who knew her well would have noticed her fingers stop moving for exactly 3 seconds. She stood smoothly and addressed the coalition assembly. "Honored members, humanity has received a formal declaration of intent from the Vrelok Empire. They demand our unconditional surrender within 30 days. The room erupted. Several species expressed sympathy. A few suggested humanity simply comply to avoid bloodshed. The Krell ambassador, representing a species that had lost 2 colonies to the Vrelok, shook his head sadly. "There is no shame in accepting reality," he said. "The Vrelok cannot be defeated. We learned this the hard way." Na Young smiled gently. "Humanity appreciates the concern of our coalition friends. We request the full 30 days to prepare for transition, as is our right under coalition law." The vote was unanimous. Humanity would have its time. Captain Dai Huang received new orders within the hour. Return to Earth immediately. All human diplomatic vessels across the galaxy received the same command. Dai felt something stir in his chest, something he had been trained to suppress for his entire adult life. He checked the authentication codes 3 times. The orders were genuine. They came from Earth Command, a branch of government most humans didn't even know existed. As the Gentle Dawn entered Earth's solar system 5 days later, Dai saw something that made his breath catch. The civilian traffic patterns were wrong. Ships were moving in formations. Cargo haulers were positioned at precise intervals. Nothing about it looked random anymore. It looked military. Ground control directed him to land at a facility he had never heard of. When he stepped off his ship, armed guards in uniforms he didn't recognize escorted him into an underground complex that seemed to stretch for miles. They brought him to a briefing room where 20 other captains sat waiting, all looking equally confused. A woman in a crisp uniform entered. Her name tag read Admiral Sun Quan, but they had never heard of any human admiral. She stood at the front of the room and studied them all with hard eyes. "You have served humanity well by playing your roles perfectly," she said. "For 83 years, you and thousands like you have convinced the galaxy that we are peaceful. You believed it yourselves. That made your performances authentic." She activated a holographic display. Images of warships filled the air, designs they had never seen before. "Humanity is peaceful by choice, not by nature," Sun Quan continued. "Before we joined the coalition, we had a violent history. Thousands of years of war. We developed weapons that could destroy planets. We killed each other in numbers that would shock every species in the galaxy combined." They felt his world tilting. This couldn't be real. Everyone knew human history. They were a young species that had developed peacefully, reached the stars through cooperation, joined the coalition eagerly. "All lies," Sun Quan said, as if reading his thoughts. "Necessary lies. When we discovered we weren't alone in the universe, Earth's leaders faced a choice: show the galaxy what we really were, or hide it. They chose to hide. Every war, every weapon, every military installation was classified beyond top secret. We created a false history, taught it in schools, made it our truth. And while the galaxy saw peaceful humans negotiating treaties, we continued doing what humans do best. We prepared for war." She showed them video footage. Human soldiers training with weapons that seemed impossible. Ships emerging from hidden bases. Production facilities buried deep underground or hidden in asteroid fields. An entire military infrastructure that had existed in secret for nearly a century. "The Vrelok made a fatal mistake," Sun Quan said. "They assumed our kindness was weakness. In 25 days, they will learn the truth. You captains are being reassigned to combat vessels. You all have military training buried in your memories, locked away by psychological conditioning. That conditioning will be removed tonight. Tomorrow, you begin remembering who you really are." They wanted to protest, to say this was insane, but something in Sun Quan's eyes stopped him. She wasn't lying. Everything she said was true. He could feel it. Across the galaxy, Ambassador Na Young sat in her private quarters and composed a single message. It was encrypted with codes that would take a quantum computer 1,000 years to break. The message contained only 3 words: "Protocol ancestors authorized." On Earth, in the hollow interior of the moon, lights began to activate. Production facilities that had been idle for decades roared to life. Weapons that had been carefully maintained, but never used, were loaded onto ships. And in 1,000 hidden locations throughout human-controlled space, people who had lived as farmers, miners, shopkeepers, and traders opened locked boxes and retrieved uniforms they hadn't worn in years. The Vrelok counted down the days to humanity's surrender. They had no idea they had just made the worst mistake in galactic history. They had gone to war with humanity, not knowing that humans were the kind ones only because they chose to be. That choice was about to end. Dr. Hai Lin walked through the xenological warfare, division with a coffee cup in one hand and a datapad in the other. Most humans didn't know this place existed. Built 300 meters below the surface of Mars. The facility housed 2,000 researchers dedicated to one purpose: understanding how to defeat Every species in the known galaxy. Give me the summary on Vrelok biology, she said to her assistant. A young man named Tay, who had joined the division fresh out of university. He pulled up the files quickly. Standard warrior species physiology, Tay read. Denser bone structure, enhanced muscular system, redundant organs. They can survive injuries that would kill most species. Pain tolerance is extremely high. They heal fast. He paused. Honestly, Doctor, in hand-to-hand combat, one Vrelok can defeat 5 humans easily. Hai Lin smiled. Good thing we don't fight hand-to-hand unless we want to. She pulled up a different file. What they don't have is creativity. Look at their battle tactics over the past 30 years. Same patterns, same approaches. They rely on physical superiority and direct assault. They've never needed strategy because they've never faced an opponent who could match them physically. She zoomed in on brain scans. Their culture values strength above all else. They see negotiation as weakness, retreat as cowardice, trickery as dishonor. That makes them predictable. Predictable enemies are dead enemies. Across the facility, Lieutenant Ji-Wan checked her equipment one final time. Her team of 12 sat in the dropship, faces painted black, weapons loaded with ammunition designed specifically for Vrelok physiology. Their mission was simple: infiltrate a Vrelok forward base, gather intelligence, and get out without being detected. 2 minutes to drop, the pilot announced. Ji-Wan looked at her team. They were special operations, the elite of humanities. Hidden military. Each had trained for years in combat techniques developed over centuries of human warfare. They knew 100 ways to kill silently. They had studied every major battle in human history, from ancient Rome to the last corporate war. Of 2156 dot, the dropship entered the atmosphere of a barren moon where the Hiyam Nevi Vrelok had established a staging area. Sensors showed 2,000 Vrelok warriors stationed there, preparing for the invasion of human space. G1's team would be inserting directly into the command center. They dropped from 10,000 meters, falling like stones until their stealth suits activated air brakes at the last possible second. They landed without a sound on the roof of the main facility. G1 used a molecular cutter to create an entrance, and they slipped inside. The Vrelok guards never saw them. Human stealth technology was generations ahead of anything the Coalition had ever seen. G1's team moved through the base like ghosts, planting listening devices, copying data files, mapping layouts. They found the main planning room and recorded everything. What they discovered made G1's blood run cold. The Vrelok weren't planning a simple invasion. They intended to make an example of Earth. Their fleet would arrive, demand surrender, and when humanity inevitably complied, they would broadcast the entire event across the galaxy. Then they would orbital bombard Earth anyway, just to prove a point. The Vrelok wanted every species to see what happened to the weak G1's team extracted without firing a single shot. 30 minutes after they arrived, they were back in space, heading to Earth with intelligence that would change everything. On Earth, Admiral Sun Quan studied the reports coming in from around the galaxy. Human civilians were reporting in from every sector. The baker on Station Gamma 7 was actually an intelligence operative. The mining crew on asteroid B447 was a special forces team. The cargo ship that had been running supplies to the Rigel colony for 20 years was a warship with enough firepower to level the city. For 83 years, humanity had maintained this deception. It had cost enormous resources. Entire generations had been born into the lie, believing humanity was truly peaceful. Only those selected for military service learned the truth, and even then, only after extensive psychological evaluation. Sun Quan remembered her own awakening 15 years ago. She had been a transport pilot, bored with her civilian job. Then one day, she received orders to report to a classified location. They had shown her the truth about humanity, about Earth's real history. The wars, the weapons, the countless conflicts that had shaped their species. They had shown her videos from the 20th century. Nuclear weapons that could destroy entire cities in seconds. Wars that killed millions. Humans had perfected the art of killing their own kind long before they reached for the stars. When they finally achieved space travel, Earth's leaders had looked at their history and made a decision. Never again. They would be better. They would be peaceful, but they would never be helpless. The moon base activated fully on day 15. The civilian contractors who maintained the research facility were evacuated. Military personnel flooded in to replace them. The massive hangar doors, each 5 kilometers wide, remained closed, but inside, ships were being prepped for launch. Captain Dai Huang stood on the bridge of his new command. A warship called the Necessary Force. His memories had been unlocked, and he remembered now. He had been a fighter pilot before becoming a diplomat. He had flown combat missions in the Titan Rebellion, a conflict that had been erased from public records. 20,000 had died in that war, fought entirely in secret, while the rest of humanity lived in peaceful ignorance. His crew consisted of 40 men and women, who had all been diplomats or civilians before their activation. Now they remembered their training. They checked weapon systems, ran combat drills, prepared for a war the galaxy thought humanity could never fight. Across human space, similar transformations were happening. Cargo ships detached their civilian hulls to reveal military vessels underneath. Mining stations activated defense grids that could repel entire fleets. Research outposts became forward operating bases. The Vrelok watched some of this activity through their long-range sensors. They interpreted it as evacuation efforts. The humans were running, hiding their civilians, preparing to surrender. This confirmed everything Thaxir believed about them. They were cowards. On day 20, Ambassador Na Young sent a message to the coalition. Humanity thanks our friends for their concern. We want the galaxy to know that we harbor no ill will toward the Vrelok people. What is about to happen is not revenge. It is education. The coalition members debated the meaning of her words. Most concluded it was just human philosophy, some attempt to find peace even in surrender. The Krell ambassador prepared a memorial service for humanity. It seemed the right thing to do. Dr. Hai Lin finalized her psychological warfare plan. The Vrelok valued honor and strength above all else. They broadcast their victories to demonstrate their power. Hai Lin would use that against them. Every Vrelok defeat would be recorded, every moment of their failure documented and transmitted across the galaxy. The proud warrior species would be humiliated publicly, systematically, completely. Lieutenant G1's intelligence gave them everything they needed. Vrelok command codes, fleet positions, supply lines, communication protocols. The humans had complete information. The Vrelok had assumptions. On day 25, Admiral Sun Quan addressed the assembled fleet commanders. 300 ships, each captained by someone who had spent years pretending to be peaceful. The Vrelok think we are weak, she said. They think our kindness is inability. They don't understand that humanity chose peace after mastering war. They're about to learn the difference. She brought up a tactical display. The Vrelok fleet will arrive at Earth in 5 days. They expect to find a defenseless planet. Instead, they'll find us. Every ship, every weapon, everything we've built in secret for 83 years. We're going to show them what humanity really is. Captain Dai Huang felt his heart beating faster. This was it. The moment when the mask came off. He thought about all the years of smiling diplomacy, peaceful negotiations, gentle words. All of it real, all of it genuine. Humanity truly wanted peace. But wanting peace and being unable to fight were very different things. The Vrelok were about to learn that lesson the hard way. In his private quarters. Dai accessed the classified historical files he now had clearance to read. He watched footage of human wars, saw weapons that made him sick to his stomach, read casualty reports that numbered in the millions. This was what humanity had been, what they had chosen to leave behind. But the capacity for violence hadn't disappeared. It had just been controlled, channeled, hidden away. And now, because the Vrelok had mistaken kindness for weakness, that violence was coming back. On day 29, the Vrelok fleet entered human-controlled space. 3,000 ships, the largest battle fleet ever assembled in galactic history. They came expecting glory. They had no idea they were flying into a trap 83 years in the making. Supreme Commander Thaxir stood on the Bridge of Blood, triumph, and looked at Earth through the viewport. The small blue planet hung in space, seemingly defenseless. His sensors showed minimal military presence, just a few patrol ships and basic defense satellites. Exactly as expected. 3,000 ships, his second-in-command said with satisfaction. Against a species with no military. This will be the easiest conquest in Vrelok history. Thaxir activated the communication system, preparing to broadcast his final demand to Earth and the entire galaxy. The Coalition had positioned observation ships at a safe distance to witness humanity's surrender. This would be a moment remembered for centuries. The day the Vrelok Empire demonstrated absolute power. People of Earth, Thaxir began, his voice transmitted across every frequency. You have reached the end of your 30 days. Surrender now, and some of you may survive as slaves. Resist, and we will erase your pathetic species from existence. He waited for the response, expecting pleas for mercy or perhaps noble but pointless defiance. Instead, Ambassador Na Young's face appeared on every screen. She sat calmly at a desk, her hands folded, that same gentle smile she always wore. Commander Thaxir, she said pleasantly, thank you for coming all this way. Before we respond to your demand, I think you should understand something about humanity. We've been very careful about our image in the galaxy. We've worked hard to be seen as peaceful, diplomatic, kind. And we are all those things. We choose to be. She paused, and her smile took on a different quality. Colder, harder. But you made a critical error. You assumed our choice was weakness. Let me show you what we really are. The moon opened. Thaxir stared in disbelief as massive hangar doors 5 kilometers wide split apart. The moon, humanity's natural satellite, wasn't solid. It was hollow. And inside were ships. Thousands of them. They poured out in perfect formation, vessels that looked nothing like the peaceful human designs the galaxy knew. These were predators, built for one purpose only. Battle stations. Thaxir roared, but his fleet was still in standard approach formation, not combat ready. They had expected no resistance. Admiral Sun Quan sat in the command chair of the flagship Necessary, evil, and watched her tactical display light up with targets. 3,000 Vrelok ships hung in space like fruits, waiting to be picked. Her fleet was smaller, only 800 ships, but every single one had been designed with 83 years of careful study into Vrelok weaknesses. Specialist Rin Mei, she said calmly. Begin electronic warfare. Rin Mei's fingers danced across her console. She had spent 15 years studying Vrelok computer systems, finding every backdoor, every vulnerability. The cyber attack she launched was surgical and devastating. In 3 seconds, she penetrated 400 Vrelok ships, shutting down their weapon systems, engines, and life support simultaneously. 400 ships disabled instantly, without firing a shot. Thaxir watched in horror as a seventh of his fleet went dark. How is this possible? His question was answered by weapons fire. Human ships opened up with cannons that tore through Vrelok armor like paper. The Coalition had banned certain weapon types as too destructive, too cruel. Humanity had never signed those treaties. They had been too busy pretending to be peaceful. Captain Jin Ho led the fighter wing assault. His squadron of 200 small, fast ships screamed through the Vrelok formation, moving in patterns no other species used, because no other species could handle the G-forces involved. Human pilots could endure 15 Gs with proper suits. They used that advantage ruthlessly. His fighters carried missiles designed specifically for Vrelok ships. Dr. Hai Lin's team had determined that Vrelok armor was strongest at the front and sides, but weaker at the rear engine section. Every human missile targeted that weak point. Dozens of Vrelok ships exploded, their reactors breached. Reformed defensive positions. Thaxier commanded, but his fleet was in chaos. They had never faced an enemy that fought like this. Humans attacked from unexpected angles, used weapons that ignored shields, coordinated their strikes with terrifying precision. The cargo ships that had been scattered throughout the galaxy revealed their true nature. Thousands of civilian vessels suddenly activated military-grade weapons and joined the fight. The Vrelok found themselves surrounded by enemies they hadn't known existed. Captain Day Huang commanded the necessary force in the thick of battle. His diplomatic training had all been real, but underneath it had been years of tactical education. He remembered now. He had studied Sun Tzu, Clausewitz, every great military mind in human history. He knew about maneuver warfare, about creating and exploiting weakness, about the importance of morale in combat. He targeted a Vrelok cruiser and gave orders that would have seemed insane to any other species. Ramming speed. Shields to maximum forward. All weapons fire on my mark. His crew executed without hesitation. The necessary force accelerated directly at the enemy cruiser, which fired everything it had. Human shields held. At the last second, Day's ship pivoted 90 degrees, scraping along the Vrelok hull, while every weapon fired at point-blank range. The enemy ship split in half. "Reform and find the next target," Day ordered calmly. This was what humans did. They adapted. They innovated. They found ways to win. On the planet below, General Yun-Su prepared her ground forces. Long-range sensors showed a Vrelok troop transport trying to land, hoping to take the war to Earth's surface. She smiled grimly. Let them come. The transport landed in an empty field in North America. 2,000 Vrelok warriors emerged, expecting to fight poorly armed civilians. Instead, they found prepared positions, overlapping fields of fire, and an enemy that had been training for ground combat since before they had written language. Lieutenant Ji Wan was part of the first response team. Her battalion of 300 soldiers hit the Vrelok forces with precision that bordered on artistic. They used human terrain to advantage, setting up kill zones, channeling the enemy into prepared positions. Vrelok warriors were individually superior fighters. In one-on-one combat, they would win almost every time. But humans didn't fight one-on-one. They fought as units, covering each other. Using combined arms tactics developed over thousands of years of warfare, Dachi Wan's team used drones for reconnaissance, artillery for suppression, and close air support when needed. They coordinated their movements with hand signals and encrypted communications that the Vrelok couldn't intercept. Within 2 hours, the entire Vrelok landing force was neutralized. 300 humans had defeated 2,000 Vrelok warriors. In orbit, the battle continued. Admiral Sung Hwan watched the tactical display with satisfaction. Her fleet had destroyed or disabled 800 Vrelok ships with minimal losses. The enemy was adapting now, reforming their lines, trying to use their numerical superiority. It didn't matter. Humans had spent 83 years studying Vrelok tactics. They knew what was coming next. Second wave, launch, she ordered. Another 500 human ships emerged from hidden positions throughout the solar system. Asteroids that looked natural split open to reveal military bases. Stations that had seemed like simple research outposts activated weapons that could crack a moon. Earth's entire system was a trap, and the Vrelok had flown right into it. Thaxer knew he was losing. Impossible. Unthinkable. The Vrelok had never lost. A major engagement. They were the galaxy's premier warriors. How could these peaceful weaklings be defeating them? He received reports from the ground assault. Total failure. The humans on the surface fought with a coordination and efficiency that suggested centuries of military tradition. Where did they learn this? When did they develop these skills? The answer was simple and terrible. Humanity had always known how to fight. They had just been hiding it. Full retreat. Thaxir ordered. His pride demanded he stay and fight to the last ship, but his duty was to preserve the Empire. He needed to warn the homeworld. To explain what had happened here, Admiral Sun Quan heard the Vrelok retreat order through intercepted communications. She opened a channel directly to the Blood Triumph. Her face appeared on Thaxir's screen. "No," she said simply. "You wanted this war. You threatened to erase us from existence. You came here to make an example of humanity. So we're going to make an example of you. You wanted to show the galaxy what happens to the weak. We're going to show the galaxy what happens when you mistake kindness for weakness." She cut the transmission and gave new orders. "All ships begin pursuit. No one leaves this system." Captain Jinho's fighters hunted fleeing Vrelok vessels like wolves after wounded deer. The human ships were faster, more maneuverable. They had better sensors, better weapons, better pilots. Every advantage that the Vrelok thought they had evaporated in the face of human preparation. Dr. Hai Lin activated the final part of her plan. Every moment of the battle was being recorded and broadcast across the galaxy. The Coalition watched in stunned silence as humanity systematically destroyed the most feared military force in known space. She made sure the footage included close-ups of Vrelok ships exploding, of their warriors surrendering, of their formation breaking in panic. The proud warrior species was being humiliated. And everyone could see it. By the end of day 30, the Battle of Earth was over. Of 3,000 Vrelok ships, fewer than 300 escaped. 2,000 were destroyed or captured. The ground forces were completely eliminated. Humanity had suffered losses, but minimal compared to the devastation they inflicted. Ambassador Na Young made one final broadcast to the Coalition. "Humanity has been peaceful for 83 years. We will continue to prefer peace. But understand this. We are peaceful by choice, not by necessity. We are kind because we choose to be kind. We are gentle because we believe in being gentle. But never, ever mistake those choices for inability. We learned a long time ago what we are capable of. We hoped you would never have to learn it too." The galaxy went silent, trying to process what they had just witnessed. The peaceful humans, the mediators and diplomats, had just destroyed the Vrelok Empire's invasion force in a single day. And from the way Admiral Sun Quan's ships were moving, they weren't done yet. They were preparing to take the war to the enemy. The Vrelok had gone to war with humanity, thinking they were fighting the kind ones. They were right about that part. They just didn't understand that the kind ones were also the dangerous ones, and that combination was the most terrifying thing in the galaxy. The pursuit began immediately. Admiral Sun Quan gave her fleet commanders one simple order: find every Vrelok military asset in the galaxy and neutralize it. Not destroy, not annihilate, neutralize. Humanity was angry, but they were still human. They still believed in proportional response, in rules of engagement. in the laws of war they had written for themselves centuries ago. The Vrelok had no such restraints, which was why they were losing. Captain De Huang led a task force of 20 ships into the Kepler sector, where intelligence reported a Vrelok occupation force holding 3 conquered worlds. His orders were clear: liberate the populations, disable Vrelok military capability, minimize civilian casualties on all sides. Tactical analysis, he requested as they approached the first world, a planet called Helios Prime. His operations officer, a woman named Min, who had previously worked as a librarian, pulled up the data. Vrelok garrison of 5,000 warriors. They've enslaved the local population of 50,000 Helians. The Helians have been under occupation for 12 years. Min's voice was tight with controlled anger. The Vrelok use them for labor mining operations. Mortality rate is 30% annually. Day felt the familiar cold calculation take over. He had been a diplomat long enough to care about suffering. He had been a soldier long enough to know how to end it. Deploy special operations teams to key infrastructure points. I want the garrison command and control taken out in the first 60 seconds. Then we broadcast surrender terms. Lieutenant Ji-Won led the insertion. Her team of 50 dropped from orbit, using the same stealth technology that had made them invisible on the Vrelok moon base. They landed in the capital city at night, moving through streets where enslaved aliens worked under the harsh lights of Vrelok overseers. The garrison headquarters was heavily defended, but the Vrelok had designed their defenses against frontal assault. They had never considered that an enemy might infiltrate with such precision. G1's team moved through the building like smoke, taking out sentries silently, planting charges on critical systems. At exactly midnight local time, every charge detonated simultaneously. The Vrelok garrison lost all communications, all sensors, all coordination in an instant. Then Captain Day's voice boomed from every speaker in the city, translated into both Vrelok and Helian languages. Vrelok forces. This is Captain Day, Huang of the Human Defense Fleet. You have 30 seconds to surrender your weapons and assemble in the main square. Refuse, and we will consider you hostile combatants. We will not ask again. The Vrelok commander, a veteran of 20 campaigns, laughed. 30 seconds? This was insulting. He ordered his warriors to defensive positions and prepared to show these humans what real soldiers could do. Exactly 30 seconds later, human gunships dropped from orbit. Their weapons were precise, targeting only military installations, only armed combatants. A Vrelok warrior raised his rifle at a gunship and was neutralized instantly. Another tried to use a Helian as a shield and found himself stunned by a non-lethal round that left the civilian unharmed. The battle lasted 7 minutes. 5,000 Vrelok warriors, some of the best troops in their empire, were defeated by 50 human special forces and air support. Not one civilian casualty. Not one building destroyed beyond military necessity. The Helians stood in the streets, staring in disbelief. Their oppressors, the warriors who had brutalized them for 12 years, were on their knees with hands bound. And the humans, these strange bipeds they had heard were peaceful, were offering medical care to the wounded Vrelok soldiers. Why did you help them? A Helian child asked Ji-Won, pointing at a human medic treating a Vrelok's injuries. Ji-Won knelt to the child's level. Because we follow rules, even when our enemies don't. That's what separates us from them. Across the galaxy, similar operations were occurring. Human task forces hit every Vrelok occupation, every garrison, every outpost. They moved with speed and precision that shocked the coalition observers following the campaign. Species that had been enslaved for decades were freed in hours. Dr. Hai Lin coordinated the psychological warfare campaign from Earth. Every Vrelok defeat was recorded in high definition. every moment of their proud warriors surrendering, every image of humans showing mercy that the Vrelok had never shown, was broadcast across every channel in the galaxy. The effect was devastating. The Vrelok Empire had built its reputation on invincibility, on honor through strength, on the idea that might made right. Watching their military crumble before an enemy they had considered weak destroyed their entire worldview. On the Vrelok homeworld, the High Council convened in emergency session. Supreme Commander Thaxir stood before them, a broken leader explaining an impossible defeat. They were hiding, he said, his voice hollow. For 83 years, they were hiding what they really were. How many ships have we lost? The first counselor demanded. 2,000 confirmed destroyed, another 1,000 captured or disabled. Human forces have liberated every one of our occupied territories. They're systematically dismantling our entire military infrastructure. Thaxir pulled up a tactical map. At current rates, they'll reach the homeworld in 15 days. The council chamber erupted in angry voices. Some called for total war, for every Vrelok to fight to the death. Others suggested immediate surrender. A few, the wisest ones, simply sat in silence, realizing that their empire had made a catastrophic miscalculation. Ambassador Na Young addressed the coalition from Earth. Her image transmitted to every member species. Humanity wants the galaxy to understand our position. We did not want this war. We have spent nearly a century building relationships, establishing trust, proving that conflicts can be resolved peacefully. The Vrelok rejected that path. They chose violence. So we responded with violence. But controlled violence, measured violence. Violence with rules and limits. She pulled up footage of the liberation of Helios Prime. Noticed that we could have simply bombed the garrison from orbit. We could have accepted civilian casualties as acceptable losses. We did not. We risked our soldiers' lives to save civilians, even enemy civilians. This is what humanity is. We are capable of great destruction, but we choose to use that capability with restraint. The Krell ambassador, who had suggested humanity simply surrender, watched the footage with tears streaming down his face. His people had been conquered by the Vrelok 8 years ago. 2 of his colony worlds still lived under occupation. And now he watched humans risk everything to free people they had never met, species they had no connection to. Why? He asked Na Young directly during a private communication. Why do you care about our colonies? What do you gain from this? Na Young's answer was simple. Because it's right. Because we believe that being strong means protecting the weak, not exploiting them. The Vrelok had the power to conquer. We have the power to liberate. We choose liberation. Captain Jin Ho's fighter squadrons hunted down the remnants of the Vrelok fleet. It wasn't glorious combat. Most Vrelok ships surrendered as soon as human forces appeared. Their will to fight had been broken at Earth. They had believed themselves invincible. And that belief had been shattered so completely that many warriors simply gave up, that some fought on. And Jin Ho respected that even as he defeated them. There was no joy in this for him. He had been a fighter pilot for 20 years, but before the Vrelok invasion, he had never fired weapons in anger. He had trained, prepared, hoped he would never be needed. Now he was needed, and he found combat to be exactly what his instructors had told him it would be: terrible, necessary, and something to end as quickly as possible. General Yun Su coordinated the ground operations across multiple fronts. Her forces moved from world to world, liberating populations, establishing temporary governance, teaching freed species how to defend themselves. It was exhausting work, but Yun Su had learned from human history. Liberation without follow-through just created power vacuums and future conflicts. We're not conquering, she told her officers. We're freeing. When we leave these worlds, they need to be able to stand on their own. train their security forces, establish their governments, give them the tools to maintain their freedom. That's our mission. Lieutenant G1 found herself training Helian security teams. The Helians were not warriors by nature, but they needed to be able to defend themselves. She taught them basic tactics, showed them how to use weapons, helped them understand that strength didn't mean aggression. You were peaceful before the Vrelok came, one Helian trainee said to her. Then you became warriors. Are we doing the same thing? Ji-Wan shook her head. We were always both. We just hid the warrior part. You can be peaceful and strong at the same time. You can prefer diplomacy, but be ready for war. The key is knowing when to use which approach. After 10 days of continuous operations, Admiral Sun Quan's fleet gathered at the edge of Vrelok space. Behind them stretched a trail of liberated worlds, disabled military bases, and captured warships. Ahead lay the Vrelok homeworld, and the final decision. Sun Quan received a transmission. Supreme Commander Thaxir, broadcasting from his homeworld. We request negotiation, he said, the words clearly painful for him. We will discuss terms of surrender. Sun Quan could have simply attacked. Her fleet had the advantage. She could have bombarded the homeworld, broken the Vrelok completely. That's what they had planned to do to Earth, but she was human, and humans believed in proportional response. We accept your request, she said. Prepare to receive a diplomatic delegation. Ambassador Na Young will represent humanity. The coalition watched in amazement. After defeating the Vrelok so completely, after suffering their threats and arrogance, humanity was offering negotiation instead of destruction. It went against everything the galaxy understood about victorious powers, but that was exactly the point. Humanity was showing the galaxy a different way. You could be strong without being cruel. You could win without annihilating. You could have the power to destroy and choose mercy instead. Ambassador Na Young prepared for her most important negotiation, not because the Vrelok deserved mercy, but because humanity deserved to prove that they were still the kind ones, even after war. Especially after war, the flagship Necessary Evil entered orbit around the Vrelok homeworld with an escort of 50 human warships. On the surface, billions of Vrelok watched their skies and waited for destruction. Their entire culture had been built on the idea of strength through conquest. Now they faced conquerors, and they understood what that meant. Their own history had taught them what happened to the defeated Ambassador Na Young stood in the shuttle bay, preparing to descend to the surface. Admiral Sun Quan approached her with concern written on her face. They could kill you down there. This could be a trap. Na Young smiled gently. If they wanted me dead, they would have kept fighting. The fact that Thaxir requested negotiation means something in their culture has shifted. Besides, if they kill me, you have orders to respond appropriately. Those orders terrify me, Sun Quan admitted, because I know I would follow them. The shuttle landed at the Vrelok capital, a massive city built from dark stone and steel. Monuments to military victories lined the streets. Statues of legendary warriors towered over the buildings. Everything about this place spoke of a culture that valued strength. Above all else, Supreme Commander Thaxir waited at the landing platform with his entire command staff. They were not bound, not disarmed. Na Young had insisted on that. This was a negotiation, not a surrender ceremony, even though everyone knew the truth. Ambassador, Thaxir said, his voice rough, we welcome you to our world. Na Young stepped off the shuttle alone, without guards, without weapons. The Vrelok warriors tensed. One small human, completely vulnerable, standing before the entire military leadership of their species. It was either incredible bravery or incredible arrogance. Thank you for agreeing to talk, Na Young said simply. Shall we begin? They met in the Hall of Victories, a chamber where the Vrelok recorded their greatest military triumphs. Holographic displays showed conquered worlds, defeated enemies, the expansion of their empire over centuries. Na Young looked at each one carefully as they walked to the negotiation chamber. "Impressive," she said. 47 species conquered. Thousands of worlds brought under Vrelok control. You built quite an empire." Thaxir waited for mockery, for condemnation. Instead, Na Young just seemed genuinely interested. "And now you wonder what happens to that empire," she continued. "What happens to your people, your culture, your history? You're wondering if we'll do to you what you did to others." She sat at the large table, gesturing for Thaxir and his staff to sit as well. "Let me be clear about humanity's position. We don't want your empire. We don't want to conquer your worlds or enslave your people. We don't want revenge, and we don't want to humiliate you further than you've already been humiliated. Then what do you want?" Thaxir asked, genuinely confused. "We want this to never happen again. To anyone." By anyone, Na Young pulled up a holographic display showing the galaxy. For 83 years, humanity has worked to build a peaceful coalition where conflicts are resolved through dialogue. You tried to destroy that, not just by attacking us, but by proving that violence still works, that the strong can still dominate the weak. We can't allow that lesson to stand. She highlighted the liberated territories. We've freed every species you conquered. Those worlds are independent now. You will not take them back. All Vrelok military forces will be reduced to defensive levels only. No more expansion, no more conquest, no more building an empire on the suffering of others. Thaxir, second in command, growled. "You would leave us defenseless? Weak? No," Na Young said firmly. "We would leave you strong enough to protect yourselves, but not strong enough to threaten others. There's a difference." She pulled up another file. "Reparations. You will provide resources to help rebuild the worlds you damaged. Technology, materials, knowledge. You'll help repair what you broke. And if we refuse?" Thaxir asked. Na Young's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes went very cold. "Then Admiral Sun Quan has orders to proceed with alternative measures. Measures that humanity really doesn't want to use. We've spent 83 years being peaceful. We've spent the last 2 weeks showing you what we're capable of when that peace is broken. Don't make us show you what we're capable when we stop holding back." The room went silent. Every Vrelok in the chamber understood the implication. What they had seen was humanity being restrained, measured, following rules of engagement. What they hadn't seen was humanity unleashed, humanity fighting without limits, humanity using the full capacity for destruction that their history suggested they possessed. "We accept your terms," Thaxir said quietly. Na Young relaxed slightly. "Good. Now let's talk about the future. Your people value strength, honor, and martial tradition. Those aren't bad things. Humanity understands warrior culture. We have our own history with it. The problem isn't that you're warriors. The problem is that you thought being a warrior meant conquering the weak." She stood and walked to one of the holographic displays, showing a Vrelok victory. "Real strength isn't defeating those weaker than you. Real strength is protecting those weaker than you. Real honor isn't taking what you want by force. Real honor is having the power to take and choosing not to." Thaxir listened, and for the first time since the war began, something other than defeat showed in his eyes. Understanding, perhaps, or at least the beginning of it. "Humanity will not occupy your worlds," Na Young continued. "We will not rule over you or dictate your culture. But we will be watching, and we will be ready. If the Vrelok Empire ever threatens another species again, the response will be immediate and absolute." She turned to face him directly. "You asked me earlier what we want. We want you to choose a different path. You're strong, you're capable, you're survivors. Use that strength for something other than conquest. Protect the weak instead of exploiting them. Build instead of destroy. Be warriors who fight for justice, not for domination. Why do you care? Thaxir asked. We threaten to destroy your species. We plan to make an example of you to terrify the galaxy. Why show us mercy? Why offer us this chance? Na Young's answer was simple and profound. Because that's who we are. We're human. We're capable of terrible violence, but we're also capable of terrible compassion. We can destroy our enemies, but we prefer to turn them into friends. We have the power to punish, but we believe in rehabilitation. This is what makes us human, and we refuse to let war change that. Over the following weeks, the treaty was formalized. The Vrelok military was reduced to 20% of its previous size. War crime trials were conducted for those who had committed atrocities against occupied populations, but the trials were fair, with evidence and defense counsel. Some Vrelok were punished, but many were simply discharged from military service. Dr. Hai Lin established cultural exchange programs. Vrelok warriors were invited to train with human forces, learning not just combat techniques, but also the philosophy behind them. When to fight, when to show mercy, how to use force as a last resort rather than a first option. General Yun Su oversaw the transition of liberated worlds to self-governance. The process was messy and complicated, but it worked. Species that had been enslaved for generations learned to govern themselves again. Some struggled, some thrived, but all were free. Lieutenant Ji Wan found herself teaching at a combined military academy where humans and former enemies trained together. She taught Vrelok warriors about tactical thinking, and they taught her about their combat techniques. Mutual respect grew from shared hardship. Captain Jin Ho and his pilots returned to their previous lives. His fighter wing was decommissioned, the ships returned to storage, the weapons put away. He went back to being a civilian pilot, flying cargo routes between colonies. But now everyone knew what he was capable of, and that knowledge kept the peace better than any threat. Captain De Huang resumed his diplomatic career, but with a difference. When he entered negotiations now, the other parties knew that his gentle words were backed by demonstrated capability. His suggestions were taken seriously. His compromises were accepted readily. Peace through strength, the old saying went, and now everyone understood what that really meant. The coalition underwent a transformation. New security protocols were established, not to prepare for war, but to prevent it. Humanity shared some of its defensive technology with member species, enough to deter aggression, but not enough to enable it. The balance was delicate, but it held. Admiral Sun Guan reduced the Shadow Fleet back to its hidden status. The warships were disguised once again as civilian vessels. The military bases returned to appearing like research stations. But now they were an open secret. Everyone knew they were there. Everyone knew what would happen if they were needed again. Ambassador Na Young gave her final speech to the coalition 6 months after the war ended. Humanity made a choice 83 years ago to hide our violent past and present ourselves as peaceful. We thought it was necessary to be accepted, to be trusted. We were wrong. True trust doesn't come from hiding who you are. It comes from being honest about your capabilities and your intentions. She looked around the chamber at representatives from hundreds of species. We are violent. Our history is soaked in blood. We have the capacity for tremendous destruction. But we choose peace. We choose diplomacy. We choose to use our strength to protect rather than to dominate. And that choice, made freely with full knowledge of the alternative, is what makes it meaningful. The speech was broadcast across the galaxy. On the Vrelok homeworld, Thaxir watched with his command staff. They were rebuilding now, redirecting their military traditions toward defensive purposes. helping to repair the damage they had caused. Do you think they mean it? His second-in-command asked. That they truly prefer peace? Thaxier thought about the Battle of Earth, about watching humanity systematically dismantle his fleet. He thought about the liberation campaigns, about humans risking their lives to free species they had never met. He thought about Ambassador Na Young sitting in the Hall of Victories, offering mercy when destruction would have been easier. Yes, he said finally. They mean it. And that's what makes them so terrifying. They could conquer the galaxy. They have the technology, the tactics, the will. But they choose not to. That level of restraint, that level of control ... We never had it. We never even understood it was possible. A new species approached Coalition space 3 years later, making aggressive demands and threatening violence. They were powerful, well-armed, confident in their superiority. The Coalition sent them a complete historical database of the HFY War. Every battle, every engagement, every moment of humanity's controlled fury. The new species reviewed the data. They saw peaceful humans negotiating for decades. They saw the Vrelok threat. They saw the moon opening and the hidden fleet emerging. They saw the systematic destruction of a warrior empire by a species that preferred diplomacy. They saw mercy offered to an enemy that had promised extinction. They withdrew their demands within 48 hours and requested peaceful diplomatic contact instead, on Earth. In a small apartment in New Seoul, Captain Dae Hwang watched the news about the new species backing down. He smiled and returned to his dinner. The system worked. Humanity had proven its point. You could be kind without being weak. You could prefer peace without being helpless. And sometimes, the most effective way to prevent war was to demonstrate that you could win it absolutely, then choose not to fight. The galaxy had learned its lesson. Humanity went back to being the kind ones, the peaceful ones, the diplomatic ones. But now everyone knew the truth. They were kind because they chose to be, not because they had to be. And that choice, backed by demonstrated capability, kept the peace better than any weapon ever could. In the end, the Vrelok had been right about one thing. They had gone to war with humanity. Their mistake was not knowing that humanity's kindness was a choice, not a weakness. And when you force the kind ones to fight, you discover that they're kind ones for a reason. They know exactly what they're capable of, which is why they work so hard to never have to do it. That knowledge, shared across the galaxy, became humanity's greatest weapon. Not the ships, not the technology, not the tactics. Just the simple, terrifying understanding that humanity was peaceful because they had mastered war so completely that they no longer needed it. And anyone who made them prove that point would regret it for generations.